I simply hope it ends as soon as it possibly can. You know, Justin, it is an unspeakable tragedy. You know, I think many of us, certainly Europeans, never expected that we'd see a war like this in Europe, the worst since World War II. And it was a war that could have been avoided. I was involved a little bit in those discussions. Putin had concerns. They could have been addressed, but he chose another path. So all I can say is, I think we cannot allow Putin's aggression to go uncontrolled. He has to be responded to. And I hope, I hope that it ends as quickly as possible. And I hope that the Russian people stand up and understand how terrible this is, not only for them, but for the whole world.
There is a real sense on the British left that they are torn, actually, about whether or not the war was provoked by NATO, but also they are torn about the extent to which it is right to back Ukraine in all of Ukraine's war aims. Do you have that? Is there that sense on the American left as well?
There is, but I think in this one, really, as somebody who has opposed so many wars of the United States, you're looking at somebody who voted against the military budget. On this one, Putin did not have to do what he chose to do. So all I can say is I hope it certainly ends as soon as possible, that there's a negotiated settlement. But I think we cannot allow Putin to run roughshod over an independent country.
Right, and that does mean supplying the weapons that the Ukrainians say they need.
Yes.
Let's turn to other matters. One of the things that I found fascinating about your book, it reminded me of how close you came to the nomination, not only the most recent one, but actually potentially back in 2016 when you were running principally against Hillary Clinton. Is that a fair thing to say, that you were
close? It is. Look, when we started that campaign, Justin, we were at something like 5% in the polls, and nobody took us very seriously. Nobody thought that a candidate with my politics would go very far. But we ended up winning state after state and millions of votes, and really threw the political establishment into a state of shock. But at the end of the day, when you're taking on the political establishment, you're taking on the economic establishment, you're taking on the media establishment, that's a tough thing to do. So we lost in 2016. But what came out of that is an unprecedented movement in modern American history of bringing working people and young people together to think big, not small. So we lost the election, but I think it is widely recognized that we won something enormously important. We helped change political consciousness in America and what working people have a right to expect from their government.
You stood again in 2020. Why did you lose that time?
Well, that time it was kind of much clearer. It was a larger field. I think at one point we had 18 or 20.
Too many for one TV studio at one stage, wasn't it?
That's right. That divided the debates in half. We won the popular vote in the first state, that was Iowa. We won a landslide victory in Nevada, which was the third state. We won a victory in New Hampshire. So we won the first three states. And that got the establishment very nervous. We lost in South Carolina. And then we have what we call Super Tuesday, which is when a whole lot of states come together. And we were favored to win many of those states. And we ended up winning California and so forth. But what ended up happening is the establishment said, you know what, we better rally around one candidate, not split the vote. That candidate was Joe Biden. And he won a number of states on Super Tuesday, and combine that with COVID and the inability to get out and campaign, he won the Democratic nomination.
You made your peace with Joe Biden very much, haven't you? And you supported him when he was the
Well, I did.
candidate.
I supported him strongly, for two reasons. Number one, it was absolutely imperative to do everything we could to defeat Donald Trump and his pathological lying and his authoritarianism. And number two, at the end of our campaign, Biden did something which was rather unusual for an establishment Democrat. He recognized what our movement was about, and he said, all right, let's put together a task force of his campaign and my campaign. Let's look at issues like healthcare, the economy, climate, housing, etc. So we sat down with him and we hammered out a very progressive agenda. It wasn't everything I wanted, quite progressive though.
Yeah, so when the Wall Street Journal say, as they did recently, Joe Biden is Bernie Sanders, they're kind of right.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. No, Joe Biden is not Bernie Sanders.
But what's the difference? I mean, if Bernie Sanders had won in 2020, what would the difference be? And won the presidency, what would the difference be?
The difference would have been I would have been, I think, a much more activist president in going down around the country and demanding and understanding there are limits to what a president can do unless you have mass grassroots working class support. So what I would have done as president is not only been commander-in-chief of the military, but organizer-in-chief, if you like, bringing working people together to fight for an economy and a government that work for all. As the book talks about, what we are looking at right now is the movement in America, and I suspect in many other countries, toward an oligarchic form of society. All right. So what we need to do is rally people, black and white and Latino, Asian American, our people to stand together for a progressive vision which substantially improves the lives of working families.
Is part of that vision an attack on the people who run the tech industry and their power that we haven't properly seen on either side of the Atlantic?
Yes, the short answer is yes. There's obviously been a revolution in technology, in social media, and so forth. And one of the things, Justin, that I worry about very much, and we touch upon it a little bit in the book, is I think people are underestimating the impact that artificial intelligence and robotics and the explosion of technology that we're seeing is going to have on the workforce. So one of the questions that has to be asked, who is going to benefit from that explosion in technology? Is technology a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. If you can produce twice as much with new technology, I think that's good. But you should benefit as a worker from that, not just have the CEO of the large corporation benefiting while you're thrown out on the street and replaced by a robotic. So that is an issue we need a lot of discussion about. But it comes down to the fundamental issue of this book, and that is power. Who has the power? And I think in this country, certainly in my country, you're looking at a handful of billionaires who have enormous control over our economy. We have more concentration of ownership than we've ever seen in American history. You're talking about more income and wealth inequality than we've ever seen in American history. And in America, I don't know how many people in the UK are familiar with our campaign finance system, but basically billionaires are able to buy elections. So what you're seeing is more and more power in the hands of a few, and I think a lot of hopelessness and despair on the part of the many.
Are those things, particularly campaign finance, being sufficiently challenged by the Biden administration? Can they be challenged by one single administration?
We could do a lot more. I mean, without, again, going into all the details, we have a Supreme Court, the reactionary Supreme Court, that made a decision on what they call Citizens United, which essentially said that billionaires have the freedom of speech to buy elections. That's their right, their freedom. I don't agree with that. Biden doesn't agree with that. But we have got to be aggressive at the state and local level to revitalize democracy and make it clear that billionaires should not be allowed to buy elections, that democracy means one person, one vote. And that means not only overturning the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, and we've tried to do some of that in the Senate. It also means turning to public funding of elections.
How radical would you be? So there's a great feeling on the American left, isn't there, that the Supreme Court itself is illegitimate, that this Supreme Court, because of the way it's elected and the fact of the way that the Senate is set up, would you be a court packer, or would you threaten to go down that road? In other words, to appoint more justices until you had a Supreme Court that you felt was
I think
willing
there
to
are
do the
other
right
ways
thing.
to deal with the problem with packing the court, as Roosevelt found out in the 30s, is so you pack it and the next guy comes along, he packs it, and you end up with 89 people on the Supreme Court. There are ways to deal with it, and I think that has to do with ways that are constitutional. which allow members to rotate off of the Supreme Court. So I wouldn't be for packing the court, but it is an issue that has to be dealt with. I think one has to be very, very naive not to believe that the Supreme Court has a political agenda. And in this case today, it is a very reactionary political agenda.